On a lonely rock in the wild Atlantic, off the coast of Scotland, stood a lighthouse, and just before Christmas in the year 1900, its 3 keepers simply vanished. When a relief boat finally reached the island, the men were gone. The lamps were ready, the beds were made, but the lighthouse was empty, and no trace of the 3 keepers was ever found. What happened on that storm-battered rock has never been fully explained. This is the mystery of the Flannan Isles lighthouse. The Flannan Isles are a scattering of tiny, uninhabited islands far out in the Atlantic, west of the Scottish Hebrides. They are wind-lashed, treacherous and desperately remote. On the largest of them, Flannan Moor, a lighthouse had been built to guide ships through those dangerous waters. It had only been in operation for about a year. Manning it was a rotating team of experienced keepers. 3 men would live on the rock at a time, tending the great light, while a 4th rested ashore. In December of 1900, the 3 men on duty were the principal keeper and 2 assistants. All were seasoned lighthouse men, used to isolation and hardship. Their world was small and severe. A lighthouse tower, living quarters, storerooms, and steep stone paths leading down to landing places on either side of the island, where supplies were hauled up from the sea. Life out there demanded constant vigilance. The Atlantic could turn from calm to fury in moments, and the seas that struck those cliffs were among the most violent in the world. For most of December, everything was routine. The light shone each night across the black water, a faithful signal that all was well on the lonely rock. Then, one night, the light went dark. A passing steamship crossing those waters noted with unease that the Flannan Isles lighthouse was not shining. It should have been impossible. The light was the keeper's single most important duty. For it to fail meant something had gone badly wrong, but the ship could only note it and sail on. The message about the darkened light was delayed. Bad weather and the isolation of the islands meant that days passed before anyone could act on it. The relief vessel that served the lighthouse had been held back by storms. It was already overdue to bring supplies, mail, and the change of keepers. Now it carried a growing sense of dread. Finally, on the 26th of December, the boat reached the island. And from the moment they approached, the crew knew something was wrong. The usual signals were absent. No flag flew. No keeper stood waiting at the landing. No boxes had been left ready by the water. The island was utterly silent. They sounded the ship's whistle and fired a flare. Nothing answered. The rock sat still and lifeless under the grey winter sky. A man was rowed ashore and climbed the steep steps alone. He found the entrance gate closed and the main door to the lighthouse shut fast. Inside, the silence was heavier still. The rooms were empty. But they were not in chaos. In many ways, everything looked eerily, unsettlingly normal. The beds were unmade in the way of men who had risen for the day. The lamps in the great tower were cleaned, trimmed, and fully prepared, ready to be lit at nightfall. The kitchen was in order. The clocks, however, had stopped, wound down, as if no one had been there for days to tend them. And there were small, strange details that would fuel the mystery for over a century. By one account, a chair lay overturned by the table, as if someone had risen in a great hurry. Everything of daily life was in its place, and yet the 3 men who should have been there were simply not. They had left no note, no sign of where they had gone, no explanation at all. The searchers spread out across the tiny island, calling the keepers' names into the wind. They searched the tower, the quarters, the storerooms, and the cliffs. There was no one. As they searched, they began to notice what the storms had done to the island, especially at the West Landing, and the scale of the destruction was staggering. The West Landing was a place where equipment was stored high above the water, on ground that should have been far beyond the reach of any wave. Yet a great wooden box, fixed in a crevice at a height that seemed impossibly safe, had been torn open and emptied. Its contents were scattered and gone. Iron railings were bent and twisted. A heavy block of stone had been shifted. Turf had been ripped away from the cliff top at a height of well over 100 feet above the sea. It spoke of waves of monstrous, almost unimaginable power. Seas so vast they had reached up the cliffs and clawed at places the keepers had believed were safe. Then came a discovery about the keepers themselves. 2 sets of oilskins, the heavy waterproof coats the men wore in bad weather, were missing from their pegs. But a 3rd set remained behind, which meant that at least one of the 3 keepers had gone outside into that terrible weather without his protective coat. To a lighthouse man, going out into an Atlantic storm without oilskins was almost unthinkable. Whatever had drawn that keeper outside, he had left in such haste that he did not stop to dress for it. From these clues, investigators pieced together a theory. It centered on the violence of the sea at the West Landing. Perhaps two of the keepers had gone down to the West Landing to secure equipment threatened by the rising storm, pulling on their oilskins as they went. Perhaps when they did not return, the third keeper glanced outside, saw a wave of terrifying size bearing down on his companions, and rushed out to help without pausing for his coat. And perhaps, in that moment, a single colossal wave, a wall of water surging up the rocks, swept all three men from the landing and dragged them into the sea. It was a plausible, sober explanation. The damage at the landing was real. The missing oilskins were real. The Atlantic was more than capable of such a thing. But the theory left uncomfortable gaps. Lighthouse keepers were disciplined and cautious men. It seemed strange that all three would be caught outside, near the water, at the same fatal moment. And so, into those gaps, other stories rushed in. In the years that followed, the disappearance grew into legend, and the legend grew stranger with each telling. Tales spread of a logbook filled with terrifying final entries, of keepers weeping and praying, of one man falling silent, of a storm raging while the rest of the world reported calm seas. These accounts made for a haunting story, but most of them appear to have been invented or exaggerated long after the fact. Dramatic embroidery stitched onto a genuine mystery. The real log entries were far more ordinary, and the truth is that the official records give us only a sober, incomplete picture of those final days. Still, the embellishments reveal something true about the case. It is the kind of mystery that the human mind cannot leave alone, that begs to be filled with ghosts and omens. Because the plain facts are strange enough on their own. Three experienced men on a small island vanished so completely that not a single body was ever recovered. Over the years, wilder theories were offered. A sudden madness, a quarrel that turned deadly, abduction by a passing ship, even in the most fanciful tellings, forces from beyond the natural world. But none of these could be proven, and most collapsed under the weight of the evidence. The sea, cold and simple and vast, remained the likeliest killer of all. What makes the Flannan Isles case endure is that no one witnessed the end. Whatever happened to those three men happened with no one to see it, on a rock at the edge of the world. They left behind a lighthouse in perfect order, a light ready to shine, and an emptiness that no explanation has ever quite filled. The lighthouse itself still stands on Islean Moor to this day, automated now, its beams sweeping the same violent waters. But no keepers live there anymore, and on that lonely rock the wind still tears at the same cliffs, and the same great waves still climb higher than anyone would believe possible. Perhaps on a December day in 1900, one of those waves reached out and took three men in a matter of seconds, and the sea simply closed over the answer. Three keepers vanished from a locked and silent lighthouse, and left behind only a stopped clock, an empty coat peg, and a question the Atlantic has never given back.